If my wife's temperament could be measured on a scale, it would blow past every known limit. That's what drew me to her in the first place. The fire, the passion, the whirlwind of energy that swept me off my feet and refused to let go. Jessica was the kind of woman who could command a room without even trying. Her laugh, sharp, bold, and unapologetically loud, would echo through any space she occupied, pulling everyone into her orbit. She was impossible to ignore. When we met, that energy felt like electricity. She was a force of nature, and I couldn't resist being caught up in her storm. I loved that she made me feel alive in a way no one else ever had. Even now, years later, I still caught myself smiling at the way she threw herself into life, every emotion turned up to maximum volume. But lately, that energy had felt different. The storm she used to direct outward, to her friends, her job, and even me, seemed to have turned inward. It started small, just little things I could dismiss as quirks or passing moods. Jessica had always been unpredictable, so I didn't think twice when she began disappearing for hours at a time, claiming she was running errands or going for a drive to clear her head. Everyone needs space now and then, right? But those absences became more frequent, and her explanations became vaguer. Then came the arguments, pointless, circular fights over the smallest things. I'd load the dishwasher, and she'd snap that I was doing it wrong. I'd ask if she wanted to go out for dinner, and she'd accuse me of being lazy for not cooking at home. Some days, it felt like I couldn't say or do anything right. When I'd ask her if everything was okay, she'd brush me off with a tight smile and say, "I'm just stressed. Work's been a nightmare." But that didn't explain the way she started pulling away. The way she'd flinch if I touched her shoulder unexpectedly, or how she'd grab her phone and turn the screen away the moment I walked into the room. I told myself I was imagining things. Jessica had always been private. She hated people looking over her shoulder even when she was texting her mom, and yet it didn't feel the same. There was a tension in the air between us that hadn't been there before. Like an invisible wall had gone up that I couldn't seem to break through. "Maybe we need a vacation," I suggested one evening, after dinner. I was trying to keep my tone light, though I could feel the unease creeping into my chest. "Just the two of us. It's been a while since we got away." She didn't even look up from her plate. "I don't have the time. Things are crazy at work right now." It wasn't just her tone that stung, it was the finality of it, like the idea of spending time with me wasn't even worth considering. "You've been working a lot," I said carefully. "Are you sure it's not too much? You've seemed distracted lately." Her fork clattered against the plate as she dropped it and stared at me. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said quickly, holding up my hands. "I just mean you've had a lot on your plate. I thought maybe a break would help." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm fine, Mike. I just need some space to breathe, okay? Not everyone can handle life by sitting in the same classroom every day." It was a cheap shot, and it worked. I shut my mouth and nodded, pretending I didn't feel the sting of her words. She apologized later, but the damage was done. The next day, she was back to her usual self, smiling and joking like nothing had happened, but something had shifted in me. I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. It wasn't just me who noticed. At a barbecue with her friends, one of them, Lisa, the blunt one who always spoke her mind, pulled me aside when Jessica was out of earshot. "You're a saint, you know that?" Lisa said, sipping her wine. "What do you mean?" Lisa gave me a knowing smile. "Living with her. She's a handful on her best day, but lately—" She trailed off, her eyes flicking toward Jessica. "What about lately?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice casual. Lisa hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing. Just forget I said anything." But I couldn't forget. That night, I lay awake next to Jessica, staring at the ceiling as she slept soundly beside me. Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand, and my eyes darted to the glowing screen. The notification disappeared before I could see what it was, and I told myself to let it go. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman I married, the woman who used to be my entire world, was slipping away from me, and I had no idea how to stop it. Jessica had always been a little dramatic. That was part of her charm. But lately, her emotions had taken on a life of their own. She'd go from laughing hysterically at a commercial to sobbing uncontrollably for no reason I could figure out. She had that look in her eyes again, the one I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was something closer to determination or maybe defiance. "What is it?" I asked, already bracing myself. She took a deep breath, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I want you to stay home tomorrow night. Don't make any plans. Don't go out. Just stay here. I have something special planned." Her request caught me off guard. We weren't the kind of couple who did surprises anymore. Our anniversaries were marked by dinner reservations and predictable gifts. Birthdays were a cake and a card. Jessica wasn't the type to orchestrate grand gestures, especially not lately. "Okay," I said slowly. "But what's the occasion?" Her lips curved into a small smile. "You'll see." I wanted to press her, but the way she looked at me stopped me short. There was something almost challenging in her expression, like she was daring me to push back. Instead, I nodded. "Fine. I'll stay home." The next evening, I sat on the edge of our bed, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had been building in my chest all day. Jessica had been in an unusually good mood, humming to herself as she moved around the house, but she'd been tight-lipped about her so-called surprise. "Just wait in here," she said as she passed by the bedroom door, a tray of wine glasses, balanced in her hands. "I'll let you know when I'm ready." "Can't you give me a hint?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She stopped, turned, and smiled at me. "Mike, just trust me. That's all I'm asking." And with that, she disappeared down the hall, closing the door behind her. At first, I waited patiently, scrolling through my phone and trying to distract myself. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't help but wonder what she was doing. The house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it. The faint sound of the front door opening, followed by muffled voices. I frowned, straining to listen. At first I thought it might be a delivery, but then I heard laughter. Jessica's laughter. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stood up, moving toward the bedroom door. I opened it a crack, just enough to peek out into the hallway. The voices were louder now, and they were coming from the living room. One of them was Jessica's, unmistakable and melodic. The other was deeper, a man's voice, though I couldn't make out what he was saying. A strange sensation settled in my chest, a mix of confusion and dread. Who was she talking to? And why hadn't she told me someone was coming over? I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding as I made my way toward the living room. But before I could get far, Jessica appeared at the other end of the hall, her silhouette illuminated by the glow from the living room. She held up a hand, stopping me in my tracks. "Mike, no, not yet." "Who's out there?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She took a step closer, her expression calm but unyielding. "Please, trust me. Just go back to the bedroom. Jess, what's going on?" Her smile didn't waver, but there was something unsettling about the way she said, "You'll understand soon enough. I promise." Against my better judgment, I nodded and retreated to the bedroom, though every instinct in me screamed to go back. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door and listening to the sounds drifting down the hall. The voices were louder now, punctuated by bursts of laughter and clinking glasses. Then the tone shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by softer, more intimate murmurs. I leaned forward, my hands gripping my knees. The words were too muffled to make out, but the tone was unmistakable, low, warm, and far too familiar. I stood and moved to the door again, my hand hovering over the knob. I needed to see what was happening. I needed to know. But just as I was about to turn the handle, Jessica's voice rang out, louder this time. "Stay where you are, Mike. Please." Her words stopped me cold. "Why?" I called back, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" There was a pause, and then she said, "Because this is part of the experiment. If you love me, if you trust me, you'll stay right where you are." I felt the floor shift beneath me, like the foundation of our home was cracking under my feet. "Jess, what the hell are you talking about?" "You'll see," she said softly. "Just wait." Minutes felt like hours as I stood there, torn between obeying her and barging into the living room. The voices continued, soft and intimate, until a low laugh from the man sent a jolt of anger through me, and then I heard him speak. "Are you sure he's ready for this?" My breath caught in my throat. Ready for what? I couldn't take it anymore. My hand closed around the doorknob and I twisted it, pulling the door open. But as I stepped into the hallway, Jessica was there again, her face calm but her eyes gleaming, with something I couldn't read. "Mike," she said, her voice steady, "I told you to stay in the bedroom." "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. She smiled, and it wasn't the smile of the woman I'd married. It was something else entirely, calculated, almost predatory. "Just trust me," she said again, her tone soft but firm. "If you really love me, you'll do this for me." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure I knew who she was anymore. I sat on the floor of the bedroom, my back against the door, staring at the dark wood grain as if it held the answers I couldn't find anywhere else. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling as the voices from the living room drifted down the hall. Jessica's laugh, warm and familiar, felt like a dagger in my chest. It was the laugh she used to save for me, back when I was the center of her world. But now, it was his laugh that answered hers, a deep, resonant chuckle that made me paralyzed. I clenched my fists, the heat of anger rising in my chest. How could she do this? And yet I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe it was the disbelief, the desperate hope that I was wrong, that this wasn't what it sounded like, that there was some other explanation. But as the minutes stretched on, the sounds from the living room left no room for doubt. "Jess!" I called out, my voice cracking. "What the hell is going on?" For a moment, there was silence. Then her voice came, calm and measured, as if we were having a normal conversation. "Mike, I told you to stay in the bedroom." "You expect me to just sit here?" I shouted, my anger boiling over. "I can hear everything. What the hell are you doing?" There was a pause, and then she said, "I'm helping us, Mike. I'm helping us move forward." "Helping us?" I repeated, disbelief dripping from my voice. "What the hell are you talking about?" Her footsteps echoed down the hall, and I scrambled to my feet just as the door creaked open. Jessica stood there, framed by the dim light from the hallway, her face calm, but her eyes sharp and unyielding. "This is part of the experiment," she said softly. "What experiment?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You're in there with another man, Jess. How is that supposed to help us?" She tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. "You said you'd do anything for me, Mike. You've told me 100 times that you love me no matter what. Now I need you to prove it." My jaw tightened, my heart pounding against my ribs. "By letting you cheat on me? Are you out of your mind?" She stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on my chest. "It's not cheating," she said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "It's honesty. It's transparency. I want you to see me. All of me. The real me." "Jess," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why are you doing this?" Her smile faltered, just for a moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Sadness? I couldn't tell. But then she straightened, her expression hardening. Because it's what we need, she said firmly. You'll understand. I promise. She left before I could respond, the door clicking shut behind her. I stood there frozen, my mind racing. Every part of me screamed to leave, to grab my keys and walk out of the house, out of her life. But my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I sank back onto the floor, pressing my forehead against the door. I hated myself for staying, for letting her manipulate me into thinking this was anything but a betrayal. From the living room, her voice floated back to me. You're so good to me, Mike. You always have been. It took me a second to realize she wasn't talking to me. The man's voice came next, low and steady. You think he'll really stay after all this? He will, Jessica replied confidently. He's stronger than he thinks. He loves me enough to see this through. I felt the blood drain from my face. She was talking about me like I was some kind of science project, like this was all a test to see how far she could push me before I broke. The sounds that followed were intimate. Soft whispers, muffled laughter, the unmistakable creak of the couch. I should have left. I should have walked out the door and never looked back. But instead, I stayed, rooted to the spot like a man watching his own execution. Jessica's voice came again, louder this time, as if she wanted me to hear. Now you see me, Mike, the real me. Isn't this what you wanted? I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. Her words echoed in my mind, each one a nail in the coffin of our marriage. You always said you'd do anything for me, she continued, her tone almost playful, that you'd love me no matter what. Now's your chance to prove it. The man laughed softly. You're ruthless, you know that? Jessica's voice dropped to a whisper, but I still caught her reply. No, I'm free. It hit me then, like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She'd planned this. The person I am, not the wife you expect me to be. I stared at her, my mind reeling. So this is who you are? Someone who cheats? Someone who manipulates her husband into staying and watching while she... I stopped, my throat tightening. Jessica flinched, and for a brief second, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But then she squared her shoulders, her chin lifting. It's not cheating if you know about it, she said quietly. That was it. That was the moment I realized I'd lost her, or maybe she'd lost me. I wasn't even sure anymore. All I knew was that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I married, or maybe she was. And I'd just been blind to it all along. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Jessica broke it, her voice soft and almost pleading. Mike, she said, stepping closer, this doesn't have to be the end. We can work through this. We can be stronger for it. I shook my head, taking a step back. I don't think I can do this, Jess. Not after tonight. Her face crumpled for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. You'll see, Mike. You'll see that this was the right thing for us. It might take time, but you'll understand. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was turn and walk away, leaving her standing there in the kitchen, her voice echoing in my mind. You'll understand. But as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, the only thing I understood was that our marriage would never be the same. I sat on the edge of the bed, a duffel bag open at my feet. The room felt suffocating, the air heavy with everything we'd said and done, or left unsaid. My hands moved on autopilot, stuffing clothes into the bag with no real plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here. The quiet of the house was unbearable. Even though Jessica was downstairs, the silence felt louder than anything we'd said in the kitchen. I kept waiting for her to come up, to say something, but all I heard was the faint hum of the fridge and the creak of the floorboards as I paced the room. I zipped the bag shut, the sound cutting through the stillness like a knife. That's when I heard her. Mike. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as she appeared in the doorway. She looked different now. Small, fragile, the fire in her eyes replaced with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Fear? Don't, I said, my voice hoarse. Please, she whispered, stepping into the room. Can we just talk? There's nothing left to say, Jess. Her face crumpled, and she moved closer, her hands reaching for mine. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I wanted to pull away, but I didn't. Her touch was warm, familiar, and it made my chest ache in a way I couldn't put into words. You're sorry, I said, the bitterness creeping into my voice despite myself. For what? For what you did? Or for the fact that I didn't react the way you wanted? She flinched, but she didn't let go. For all of it, she said softly. For hurting you. For everything. I wasn't thinking straight, Mike. She swallowed hard, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I made a mistake. Oh. Mistake? I repeated, my voice rising. Jess, a mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated. Planned. You knew exactly what you were doing. Her tears spilled over and she shook her head. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I swear, Mike. I thought... She stopped herself, taking a shaky breath. I thought it would help us. I thought it would bring us closer. Closer? I laughed bitterly, stepping back and pulling my hands free. You think betrayal brings people closer? You think manipulation is love? Her face crumpled further and she sank onto the bed, her hands twisting together in her lap. I know what I was thinking, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was lost, Mike. I didn't know what to do. I felt like we were drifting apart and I panicked. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw, for a moment. I stood there, staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one I thought I knew. Why didn't you just talk to me? I asked, my voice cracking. Why couldn't you just tell me how you were feeling? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Because I didn't know how, she said. Because I was scared. Scared that if I told you the truth, you'd leave. And I thought if you saw me, the real me, you'd understand. I shook my head, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. I don't understand, Jess. I don't understand any of this. She stood then, stepping closer, her hands trembling as she reached for me again. I know I hurt you, she said, but please, Mike, don't go. Don't let this be the end of us. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to hate her, to walk out and never look back. But I couldn't, not completely, because despite everything, I still loved her. Every word, every action had been carefully orchestrated to trap me here, to force me to watch as she destroyed the foundation of our life together. And I let her. I leaned my head against the door, my breath shaky as tears burned at the corners of my eyes. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved become a stranger? But as the minutes ticked by, my despair turned to something else. Resolve. I couldn't let this break me. Not completely. If she wanted me to see the truth, to face the reality of who she was, then I would. But not the way she intended. I stood up, wiping my face with the back of my hand. If there was one thing I needed more than anything else, it was the truth, even if it destroyed me. The front door clicked shut, and the low rumble of the stranger's car faded into the night. The house was silent again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I stood in the hallway, staring at the empty living room, the remnants of their evening scattered around like clues in a crime scene, a wine glass on the coffee table, the throw pillows slightly askew, the faint scent of cologne still hanging in the air. And then there was her. Jessica stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame like nothing had happened. Her hair was slightly tousled, her cheeks flushed, and her lips curved into a soft smile, the kind she used to reserve for me. "Well," she said, her tone light and conversational. "That went well, don't you think?" My hands balled into fists at my sides. "What the hell are you talking about?" She tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "This. Tonight. Us." "I think it was a step forward, Mike, don't you?" "A step forward," I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. "Are you out of your mind, Jess? You think this, whatever the hell this was, makes us closer?" Her smile faltered just for a second, before she straightened up and crossed her arms. "I think you're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" My voice cracked as I gestured toward the living room. "You invited another man into our home, Jess. You—" I couldn't even say the words. My throat closed around them, choking me. "And you think I'm the one being dramatic?" She sighed, brushing past me and heading into the living room to tidy up, like we'd just finished hosting a dinner party. She picked up the wine glass, swirling the last few drops of red wine before placing it in the sink. "Mike," she said, her tone almost patronizing, "you always said you wanted to be close to me, to understand me, to see every part of me." She turned to face me, her eyes bright with a mix of defiance and something I couldn't name. "Well, now you have." I stared at her, my chest heaving with a mix of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. "This isn't closeness, Jess. This is insanity. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us?" She rolled her eyes, leaning against the counter. "Oh, come on. Don't act like this is the end of the world. It's the end of—" "Something," I shot back. For the first time that night, a flicker of frustration crossed her face. "You always say you'd do anything for me, Mike. You've told me 100 times that you love me no matter what. Was that all just talk?" "I didn't sign up for this," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't sign up to be humiliated, to be lied to. To what?" she interrupted, her tone sharp now. "To be part of my life? Because that's what this was, Mike. It was about bringing you in, making you part of something real." "Real?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You call this real? This wasn't about us, Jess. This was about you, about whatever sick game you're playing." She stepped closer, her expression softening. "It's not a game, Mike. It's an experiment. A way to test our love, our commitment." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, her touch burning like fire. "I wanted you to see me, all of me. The good, the bad, the messy. I wanted us to be stronger for it." "Stronger?" I barked out a humorless laugh. "You think this makes us stronger? You destroyed everything, Jess, everything we built together. How am I supposed to trust you after this?" Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment the softness vanished, replaced by something colder. "You said you'd love me no matter what. I gave you a chance to prove it, and instead, you're standing here judging me. This isn't love," I said, my voice trembling. "This is manipulation." Her expression shifted again, her lips pressing into a tight line as she crossed her arms. "You're making this into something it's not, Mike. You're stuck in your narrow little view of what a marriage is supposed to be, and you can't see the bigger picture." "And what's the bigger picture, Jess?" I asked, throwing up my hands. "Enlighten me?" She hesitated, and for the first time all night she seemed uncertain. "The bigger picture is freedom, honesty, being ourselves without the masks we wear every day. I wanted you to see the real me, Mike, and that realization scared me more than anything else." "Jess," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I can come back from this." Her tears came faster now, and she grabbed my hands, holding them tightly as if she could anchor me to her. You can, she said. We can. Please, Mike, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy. I'll change. Just don't leave. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she meant it, that she could undo the damage she'd done. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I could ever look at her the same way again. I sank onto the bed, my head in my hands, as the weight of it all came crashing down. Jessica sat beside me, silent now, her hand resting lightly on my back. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until finally, I looked up at her. I don't know if I can trust you again, I said. Quietly, her face crumpled, but she nodded. I know, she said, but I'll do whatever it takes to earn it back. I promise. Her words sounded sincere, but they didn't reach me. Not really. I felt like I was floating, untethered from reality, unsure of what was real and what was just another layer of manipulation. I stood, grabbing my duffel bag and slinging it over my shoulder. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Where? Are you going? She asked, her voice trembling. I need time, I said. I need space to think. Mike, please, she said, standing and grabbing my arm. Don't go. Stay. We can figure this out together. I hesitated, her touch burning against my skin. For a moment, I almost gave in, but then I remembered the look in her eyes last night, the way she'd spoken to that man, the way she'd spoken to me. I can't, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her hand fell away, and I turned toward the door, my heart breaking with every step I took. Mike, she called after me, her voice desperate. I love you. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, and closed my eyes. I love you too, I said. But sometimes that's not enough. And with that, I walked out, leaving her standing there, her sobs echoing in the empty house behind me. The motel room was small and quiet, the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. I sat on the edge of the bed, the duffel bag at my feet untouched since I'd dropped it there hours ago. The clock on the nightstand ticked steadily, but I couldn't tell if it was moving forward or backward. My mind was a storm, replaying the events of the past few days over and over. Jessica's laughter, her voice, her tears, her betrayal. And yet I couldn't stop thinking about her. I hated that even now, after everything, I still loved her. I hated that I could still picture the way her eyes lit up when she was excited, or the way her laugh used to make me feel like the luckiest man in the world. I hated that I couldn't separate the woman I married from the stranger she'd become. The memories came in waves, crashing over me. I remembered our first date, the way she'd walked into the cafe with her head held high, her energy filling the room before she even spoke. She'd laughed at all my dumb jokes, leaning forward with her chin in her hand like I was the most interesting person in the world. I remembered the night I proposed, kneeling on the grass in the park where we'd had our first picnic. She'd cried as she said yes, throwing her arms around my neck and laughing through her tears. I remembered the way she used to look at me, like I was her anchor, her safe harbor. And I remembered the way she looked at that man last night, with the same spark in her eyes, the same warmth in her smile. The contrast was unbearable. By the time the sun began to rise, I knew I had to make a decision. Staying in this limbo was killing me. I reached for the motel notepad and pen on the nightstand, my hands trembling as I began to write. Jessica, you said you wanted me to see you for who you really are. Well, now I have. I've seen the sides of you I never knew existed. The parts you kept hidden. The parts you thought I couldn't handle. And you're right. I didn't handle it well. I don't think anyone would. I love you, Jess. I probably always will. But love isn't enough to fix what's broken between us. It's not enough to erase what you did or the way it made me feel. You wanted me to understand you, to see the real you, and now I do. But in doing that, I've also come to understand myself. I don't belong in your life anymore. Not the life you've chosen. Not the version of you that you've become. Maybe someday you'll look back and realize what you've lost. Or maybe you won't. Either way, this is where I leave you. Take care of yourself. Mike. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into an envelope from the motel desk. After packing my bag, I drove back to the house. The morning light made everything look deceptively normal. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the flowers in the garden still blooming brightly. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, this house had felt like the epicenter of my world crashing down. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee and the faint remnants of her perfume hitting me all at once. The house was silent, and I could see the light in the kitchen spilling into the hallway. Jessica was sitting at the table, staring into a cup of coffee. She looked up when I entered, her eyes wide with hope and fear. "You came back," she said softly. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the envelope on the counter and turned to leave. "Mike," she called after me, her voice trembling. "Please, don't do this." I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. For a moment, I considered turning around, looking at her one last time. But I didn't. "Goodbye, Jess," I said quietly, and then I walked out. The air outside was cool and crisp, the kind of morning that used to make me feel alive, but now it just felt empty. I tossed my bag into the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared, entirely. I told myself I was free. Free from her lies, her manipulation, her betrayal. But the truth was, I didn't feel free. I felt like I was still carrying her with me, like a weight I couldn't put down. Maybe I always would. As I drove away from that house, the weight of everything that had happened still pressed heavily on my chest. I did what I thought was right. I walked away, even though it tore me apart. But sometimes, late at night, I catch myself wondering, did I make the right decision? Should I have stayed and tried harder to rebuild what we had? What would you have done if you were in my place? Could you forgive someone who shattered your trust? Or would you have walked away like I did?